good to be together with you again and to have this chance to explore a subject that is so fundamental to the lives of all of us, and that is the subject of the mother. When we go out, when we leave home and step out of the door and walk down the street and walk into the park or venture into the forest, we are likely to see the signs of motherhood everywhere. You might find a human mother walking with her child in the park. You might find a great tree under which little saplings are springing up. You might see in the pond a mother duck leading her little birdlings along. Motherhood is everywhere. And before long you might begin to look at the earth itself as the mother of all of this. So we couldn't possibly explore nature and all that nature contains and reveals without being sure to spend some time contemplating the holiness of maternity. We wouldn't be here ourselves if it weren't for our mothers. Now, centuries ago, King Akbar was the most powerful man in the world, arguably. He had the largest army and the largest treasury. He was the most powerful man in the world. When his mother died, he was disconsolate. He couldn't stop weeping. And all of his ministers tried to console him and said, "What do you have to grieve over? Look at your position. Look at your status. You are the most powerful man in the world. Everyone bows to you." He said, "That is so. But while she lived, there was one person, and one person alone, to whom I could bow. And now she's gone." Tomorrow, in the Sunni tradition of Islam, the birth of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is celebrated. So Muslims all across the world are preparing glowing celebrations. It's a time to remember all that the Prophet has brought to this world. Specifically, it's a time to remember his birth. His father died before he was born, and so his mother brought him into this world alone. Amina was her name. And she herself left this world when he was around 7 years old. But what she gave to him in those 7 years was priceless. And in the hadith we read this report. The Prophet was asked, "Among people, who is most deserving of loving kindness?" He answered, "Your mother." The questioner asked, "After her, who?" He replied, "Your mother." He asked, "After her, who?" He said, "Your mother, then your father." So 3 times he answered when he was asked, "Who deserves your care, your love, your respect?" He kept answering, "Your mother," and only then, as an afterthought, "Your father." Well, this tradition of deep regard for the role of the mother is one that reaches us through the being and teachings of our founder, Hazrat Pir Zia Inayat Khan. And he transmitted it to his eldest child, Noor, so clearly that she never forgot it, and she wrote about it. She remembered this as the first lesson that she received from her father. These are her words. The first lesson Abba taught his little ones was to open their eyes to the selfless love and devotion and constant sacrifice of their Amma. He painted in our little hearts the ideal of motherhood in all its beauty and purity. Heaven lies at the mother's feet. That's another hadith. Heaven lies at the mother's feet. He taught us to show our gratitude in the smallest little way, to renounce gladly a game or amusement if we saw the least little thing which we could do to give joy to our Amma, or if we felt that our playing caused her the least displeasure. When playtime was over, just before the night covered our solitary house in the middle of the cornfields, the 4 little ones went off to sleep. Before they went off to sleep, Abba would gather them around him, most times the little Khairunisa on his knees, and he told them the stories of his childhood, and he told them of his love of his mother, and the sweet deeds which that love brought about. He rooted in our souls the feeling that our first and most sacred duty was towards our mother, and even our prayers to God were secondary, for the prayers of the child which does not consider its mother are not heard by God. In the Hindu tradition, it is said that the mother is the first guru. How can one learn respect in this world? How can one respect anyone if one hasn't begun by appreciating the mother's love? And the mother is the first teacher who teaches love. We learn how to love by being loved by our mother, by being held, by being fed. And not just this, the manner of that holding, the manner of that feeding, the glance, the presence, the tone in the voice. In this way, the heart develops. The heart would not develop if it were not for this original dispensation of love. And Noor speaks of this too. In a poem that she wrote to her mother, she wrote a poem on her mother's birthday every year. And these poems taken together are a treasury of spiritual knowledge. It's easy to overlook it because they're playful and sweet. They aren't ponderous and heavy and obviously deep, but they are deep because these are transmissions of the deep awareness of the love that comes through the divine being as embodied by and transmitted by the mother, and how that forms our individuality as it blossoms toward personality. She writes, "A little lute each baby heart doth carry from above, and mother plays on baby's heart the 10 dearest notes of love. And each brings forth a gift that grows as baby grows each year. The love of mother ever flows her little plant to rear, And when it plays an instrument with talent and with art, 'tis always on the lute God sent, in every little heart. And all the music that this day to you we all impart, the same did Mama always play in baby's little heart. So the heart is an instrument that is brought into this world. It's God-given, but we don't know what to make of that instrument until we are taught, and we're taught by that original love at the beginning of our life. We're taught by the presence of the mother, and all of the melodies that we learn in the course of our life have their origin in these original lessons. Now, it needs to be said that mothers are human beings like other human beings. And some mothers carry in their own hearts great wounds, great fears, great losses. For some mothers it can be overwhelming to find themselves now with child and entrusted with this new life. Some are struggling to find their own footing. And so it is that while each mother necessarily, simply by the act of carrying the child in her womb, embodies and communicates the divine love in its fullness, at the same time, the child may sometimes receive from the mother mixed signals or pick up on the fears in the mother, and the mother's, at times, it may be impatience or frustration or dissociation from the moment, withdrawal. All of these possibilities are there. But we are not left, none of us are left bereft of motherhood in some form, even if it doesn't come from one's birth mother. Some don't know their birth mother. Some are raised by other caregivers. But motherhood is something that all of us know in our lives. We know its blessing because the mother takes many forms. It might be one's physical mother, and very often it is one's physical mother. But there are many manifestations of the mother, and we would not be who we are in this world if we were not taught to play the instrument of our heart by a mother. Now, in a previous gathering, we talked about a problem that exists in Western civilization. In fact, it exists in various parts of the world, and that is the notion that matter is something ignoble, something to be embarrassed about, something to rise above, something to transcend. We've all, to some extent, imbibed this cultural idea. And part of our work in these gatherings of nature meditations is to re-examine that assumption and not to take it for granted. To meet nature anew with fresh eyes. To suspend prior judgments having to do with the fallenness of nature. And this will certainly affect our ability to appreciate and understand the mother, because the very word matter is associated with mater, mother. Now, the misogyny that undoubtedly exists in in human history and which is notable in our own Western cultural inheritance has to do with an understanding of matter as something ignoble. Because in the embryology that we've inherited, and which comes down from Aristotle specifically, the assertion is that the father contributes the form to the child and the mother contributes the matter. And then in the theory of hylomorphism, in Aristotelian hylomorphism, the form is what really constitutes a being. That's its true essence, and the matter is simply the substance through which it manifests itself. So, according to this concept of embryology, the father gives the form to the child, the meaning to the child, and the mother simply gives the substance through her menstrual blood. But we know that this is incorrect. We know this now through biology, that the mother possesses not only menstrual blood, but possesses an egg, which is equally significant in contributing the genetic information that creates the child. So it isn't only the seed that contains the form, the idea of the child, but the egg equally. And the egg and the semen, the sperm, together unite as a zygote, a coupling of these two transmissions of information. So we know that the mother is not, as Aristotle said, the patient as opposed to the male agent. The mother is not merely the passive receptacle, but she contributes equally to the form, the idea, through her contribution of genes. And the two form a zygote meaning a joining, that word that is related to the word yoga, a yoking. There's a yoking of the feminine dispensation and the masculine dispensation in that zygote that becomes an embryo that has become each one of us. So there's an equality that Aristotle missed. Now it's true that the seed is sent out from the male. The female egg receives it. But there's another aspect of the feminine contribution, and that is that for 9 months, it's the uterus that shelters the embryo and feeds it and nourishes it and protects it. And so, while at the level of genetic intermingling there's an equality, if you consider those 9 months, the feminine contribution to the emergence of that life is enormous. And that is what is conveyed by the word rahma. Rahma, meaning compassion. A word that comes from raham, which means womb. When we speak of Allah as Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, that means that the divine nature is inherently womb-like in its compassionate nurturance, its benevolent tending to all the lives that emerge from it. So we need a paradigm shift, and it's occurring in our times, of course, a shift away from the idea of matter as static, passive, and a revelation of the richness and fertility that the feminine brings to bear on the lives of all of us.